Good evening and welcome. I'm Sheila Balgobin and I am the Dream Decipherer, and I help you to crack the code of your sleep and dreams so you can sleep sound and dream deep. This evening's dream features authoritarian regimes and zombies. So let's see what's going on with this. The dreamer reports that they were in an enclosed work environment, perhaps a community center or country club. And while standing in the reception area with another colleague, a male colleague, they noticed that the lifts or elevators and exit doors had all been shut, presumably locked, and that CCTV cameras had been installed. And the dreamer and the colleague realized that the government was, or management rather, was becoming increasingly authoritarian in its approach. The dream jumped forward a couple of years to give the dreamer a glimpse of that future, his future, and realized that they was still in the same job, but was working there and felt trapped like a slave. And the dream kept progressing by 2 years, in 2 year intervals, showing that he's becoming, like it says, trapped like a slave, more stupid, less fit, and eventually 20 years had passed and he had become basically like a zombie. But it happened so gradually and so subtly that he didn't actually notice. But eventually the dreamer and the colleague woke up, and decided that they had to break free. They needed their freedom. And they, for whatever reason, became fixated on a building that was nearby that was called Trellis 6, which became their kind of cri de guerre, their rallying cry. And the dream ends there. Now, some interesting imagery going on here, but let's start at the beginning. The dreamer reports being in a community center or country club. And there's quite a contrast there. I mean, the community center implies that it's more common. It belongs to the general population, the poorer half of the world, so to speak, versus the country club, which is exclusive. It's not open to everyone, and it's usually the playground of those who have money. But in any case, there's something there with this juxtaposition of it's either being a community center open to the public, and a country club, which is much more exclusive, and more private, and therefore it basically puts it just basically segregates people into two groups. Now, the people are feeling trapped. There's no exits. The exits and elevators or lifts have been blocked, and they're being tracked. They're being followed around by CCTV cameras. Now, it's interesting about that, and we'll come back to those elements in a minute, but the dreamer and the colleague decided that the management was becoming much more authoritarian, or more big brotherish, if you will. The dream fast forwards over several years up to a maximum of 20 years, where the dreamer finds that is still stuck in the job and working like a galley slave. And finally, at the end of 20 years, he realized that he's just totally demoralized and become this slavish zombie, but didn't even notice that this had happened. It crept up on him. And when when I thought about, looked at this, and read this, it reminded me of the movie The Matrix, where you have these little blobs of humanity that are hooked up to machines that are basically creating reality for them. So they think they're walking around and doing things, but they're nothing but little blobs of brains. Um, and there is something to that. The Matrix is not fantasy, it's already here. Now, the dreamer and the colleague woke up from this kind of stuporous state and made attempts to break free. And their rallying cry became the name of a building that was next door called Trellis 6. Now, interestingly enough, Trellis 6 reminded me of a couple of things. There's in the, I think it was the 60s or 70s, there was a building that was constructed, a high rise building called Trellick Tower, which was considered like the latest in ultra modern design back in the day. But it also, by extension, for some reason, the another tower came to mind, and that was Grenfell, which was the scene of a really horrific fire where people were trapped, unable to get out, and many died as a result. So there's seems to be uh, silent protest going on in this dream with regard to, again, referring to lockdown in a more oblique way, where you're, um, they have these new programs like track and trace to make sure that people aren't spreading COVID around. And there's a lot of people that are of the opinion that we're marching straight into the big brother state where, they're watching everything we do all the time. And so there seems to be, uh, on the one hand, talking about curtailing of people's freedoms and being basically locked up in prison, in a sense, as opposed to some certain people not being locked down, and able to act with impunity. It seems when it comes to isolating themselves, minimizing contact with others, etc. It's this theory. It seems to be an expression of concerns about how, in the interest of protecting people, we're entering into George Orwell's 1984 or The Matrix, where Big Brother truly is watching you all the time. So the dreamer's expressing some concerns here, I think. And I would ask him if that maybe what was might be on his mind about government control and surveillance. And it's a concern that's shared by many people around the world, with regard to different things. It could be 5G, this track and trace program, registering people for vaccines, and this and that and the other. So there's a lot of concern that the virus is being used as an excuse for governments and other entities to basically control people. And I just wondered if that's one of the concerns being expressed here by the dreamer, but also, if I wonder if there's something with regard to the dreamer's working life, in that, you're in the same job doing the same thing, and you start to feel a bit like a zombie, which is why I became self-employed. I decided I didn't want to live like a zombie anymore. So there are, on the personal level, there are some issues that are being brought up, with regard to perhaps the dreamer's working life. But in a broader sense, again, COVID keeps raising its head in people's dreams in different ways. And there seems to be a concern here, with regard to increasing government surveillance, increasing government control, over how what we do and how we do it. So some interesting questions there for the dreamer to look at, I think. But it's perhaps a call to all of us to look at what's going on, and deciding whether um, various powers that be, the PTBs as I call them, actually have our best interests at heart, or have they got some other agenda going on? So that's for you, conspiracy theorists. There, you can go to town, because there's a lot of information that we're just not getting, a lot of wrong information that we're getting, and people are suffering for it. So it's really, really something we should all be thinking about. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Have a great evening and rest of the week, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.